Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da.
Welcome to episode 59 of the Civil War Breakfast Club. Tonight, I'm joined by my co-host and veteran survivor of my Tuesday night moods for the last year and a bit, Darren Weeks. I'm Mary, and my spirit animal is General Mead's mood. Hey, Darren, how's it going?
I'm suffering from PTMD, post-traumatic Mary disorder. So that explains a lot, actually. Yeah, boy, this is an exciting start to this one.
Did you see why I said I almost had to change my intro?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Ooh, real good at that one. Anyway, what's happening? What's going on?
Not much. I see by your name you survived my mood, apparently.
Oh, yeah, you certainly the struggle was real this week. That's for damn sure.
Well, apparently Mercury is in retrograde, which our technology certainly reflected that tonight. We're recording a little bit later than what we normally do, but whatever, we're here. We worked out all the issues we were having, and so here we are.
I never thought Mercury was real. I thought it was like birds. It just didn't exist.
Burbs. Anyway, so how are you doing?
We're doing pretty damn good, you know? Life is good. Life is great.
Yeah.
It's been raining here forever. You know, it's been but it's coming around. It's rain is stopping. So coming into that fall season again, pumpkin beer and pumpkins coffee and football's in full swing, both pro and college. So things are good. Things are pretty good. Technology is hanging in there. I bought myself a pumpkin. That's very exciting. That's on my steps right now. So it's very exciting.
Is that the $1 million pumpkin?
Yep, it was $6 for pumpkin. It's now the I'm now the proud owner. I never thought I'd be a pumpkin owner, but that's what I am. That's what we are. So
let's get down to business before we get to the discussion of the road to Perryville, which is our topic for tonight, and we'll explain that in a few minutes. What are you drinking?
Well, I'm drinking pumpkin spice cannoli right here, and I've had this before. This is from Shea Bean Brewery. I think that's it is. I can't really read it because it's dark in here. I'm drinking out of my North Civil War Champions coffee mug because although we're not going to get into the details of the battle on this episode, that'll have to wait till next episode. We can talk certainly about hinting at who ultimately wins this one. Yes. So that's what I did.
Yes.
What about yourself? I'm sure it's something that's a downer, whatever you're drinking.
So I am drinking, and then Bernice flipped the canasta table, which is an East Coast double India Pale Ale, and it's from Refined Fool Brewing Company out of Sarnia, Ontario. It's a very good brewery. It's also an 8.2% beer, which I actually need tonight after the technology issues. And I'm drinking it out of my Rock of Mill Springs mug.
Excellent.
Rock of Chickamauga, George Henry Thomas mug, because we might talk a little bit about him tonight in our lead up. But we did say on our Facebook Live that we were going to be covering Perryville, and that's what we've been talking about for a few weeks. Well, we decided in our research that Perryville is a very complex battle, and the lead up to it is just as important as the battle itself. So we didn't want to rush through it or whatever. So tonight we are going to be talking about the road to Perryville.
Well, they say the destination is not as fun as the journey. So today we're going to talk about the journey. We're going to talk not about the Battle of Perryville specifically. That we'll say that until next week. We're going to lead right up to it. We're going to call the road to Perryville. So we'll go, and we were talking a couple of days ago about the importance of the state of Kentucky, or the Commonwealth of Kentucky, as it's officially called. So we thought, unless you really get into why and how the lead up to this battle was, it kind of does a little bit of a disservice to the battle, because otherwise it's just a battle. But this battle was one of the more strategic, one of the more important battles of all the Civil War. For whatever reason, it doesn't get the Gettysburg and Antietam love. But I think when you study this, you realize how important it certainly was. So we have to go in the way, way, way back machine. We got to set the DeLorean back, way back.
Ooh.
Okay. So
is it time for me to sing?
Cher's got to belt it out to the back row on this one. This is how far back we got to go.
If I could turn back time.
God, I'm telling you what, those poor windows that broke in my neighborhood. Anyway,
at least not call me maybe.
Oh, no, that's 8.2. You're on your way.
Yeah,
so
I am.
So we're going to talk about the setup and why it was important. And then we're going to talk about how the North and the South kind of danced around each other until they finally arrived at Perryville and really, really slugged it out. Yeah. So Battle of Perryville, to highlight, 1862 is the second year of the war. It was clear that this was going to go on for a while. At this point, those Lincoln 90-day enlistments were laughable, considering that it was going to last a lot longer than 90 days. The Union and the Confederacy by 1862, they needed battlefield wins for different reasons. The Rebs obviously need the win there because of the skyrocketing cotton prices in Europe. They're hoping that if they get a big win, they maybe can get some recognition from Europe. Lincoln, of course, needed an Emancipation Proclamation, as well as his midterms in 1862, and of course his election in 64. So as the war was kind of going around and around in the East, the focus was turning on those border states, and specifically the two ones in the West, Missouri and especially Kentucky. This will ultimately culminate on October 8, 1862 in the Battle of Perryville. But Kentucky, it was an extremely important border state for both the Union and the Confederacy, and was really because of the terrain for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
The Ohio River runs right through it. A river runs through it. They should make a movie called that. And it's extremely important for that state's economy. The state of Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, I got to keep saying that right, but they had a solid, real economic ties to the north. It was full of supplies, railroad lines, river ports. And we talked about this when we talked about Richmond a little bit. Neither Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, I told you may have heard of him.
He's the man with the hat, right?
He's the guy with the hat, okay. Nor Jefferson Davis particularly were very popular in Kentucky, despite
even
the fact
though they were born there about a year apart and less than 100 miles from each other.
I mean, Lincoln from Hardin County and Davis from Todd County. And the funny thing about it is Lincoln's running for president in 1860.
Yeah.
And he won. But he finished pretty much dead last in his own home state of Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
John Bell won it with 45% of the vote. Lincoln got less than 1% of the vote in Kentucky, and he still won. This is his home state. It was a pro-slave state, but still wanted to be part of the Union overall. Henry Clay, he was another Kentuckian. He did his thing in 1820 with the 1820 Compromise, and it kept the pro-enslaved forces at bay in Congress. And it's going to kind of show a little bit in the state as it kind of goes through. So by February of 1861, Kentucky was a complete friggin' mess.
Yeah.
It has a pro-Union legislature, as a pro-Southern governor, and of course the great Beriah Egg McGoffin. We talked about him, right? McMuffin, right? He tells Lincoln that he's not going to help him militarily. He says, Kentucky will furnish no troops for the wicked purpose of subduing her sister Southern states. Okay, no black and white area there. No gray area anyway. Kentucky had two militias, one pro-Union, of course, one pro-Southern. Yeah. April 18th, a couple days after Fort Sumter, the legislature creates that Unionist militia guard that homed in defiance of McGoffin, who was sympathized with his friend Simon Bolivar Buckner, who we'll talk about here. Yep. He had set up that pro-Southern militia guard. So it was kind of like a yin and yang in that whole state. May 16th, 1861, important day for this whole conversation. The Kentucky House and Senate each passed a proclamation of neutrality, and they would sit this one out. They're going to sit out the war, despite the fact that many Kentuckians were itching for a fight at home. They just wanted to fight because for whatever side, the state government, basically what they did is they kind of followed Henry Clay's example and just kind of played it in the middle, pro-slavery, pro-not.
Well, they're a very unionist-leaning state to begin with because they have these ties, very close ties to Ohio and Indiana, and even the slaveholders, they were very pro-union even though they were slaveholders. So there's this union sentiment in the state, and the geography definitely plays into it. As you said, they're growing crops in the south part of the state that are more like what they would grow in the deep south, like Kentucky's cash crop is tobacco, and then in the north they're growing the more cereals like the wheats and all that, and probably barley. I don't know my crops very well, but anyway, they're growing the cereal grains. But yeah,
certainly a state that creates Frosted Flakes is a serious situation, right?
They're great.
Oh,
that was bad. Poor Tony the Tiger.
An absolute edit that one out. But the thing what Kentucky does though is they say, look, we're not going to fight, we're not going to do it. But we'll mediate between you two, which is, I don't know what the heck that means, but obviously didn't really happen. May 20th, McGoffin really has no choice. He's got to sign the proclamation, okay, at the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And again, it's important to call it a Commonwealth. Somebody needs to tell a Missouri football coach that's a Commonwealth. Just remind him, obviously. but
Burn.
Anyway, he signs that means that the Commonwealth of Kentucky is not going to choose sides, going to stay in the middle. And that's really what the whole thing is about here. Now, Lincoln, again, not popular, okay? He's pissed off at Kentucky because they're not going to join the Union cause. That he has that famous quote, "I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky."
Yep.
And then he says, but then he's also happy, hey, they didn't secede, because he also says To lose Kentucky is to lose the whole game.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that one that was, he feels like he could lose the whole game with it because if, I think he's of the attitude like if Kentucky leaves, then the other border states like Maryland, the other ones are gonna be like, oh fuck that, we can leave too, let's go.
That was the big thing too. Was if Kentucky had flipped, it's very possible that almost immediately later Missouri would have, and then Maryland probably would have, just because they would have. But who's to say? The compromise didn't end well. What it didn't do is it didn't end that political climate in the state of the Commonwealth. Here I go with that.
You mean the great state of Kentucky?
Oh, yeah, great state of Kentucky. You got it. Okay. It kept Lincoln's and Davis's eyes both on that state. It was basically a tinderbox, and they were both looking at it, waiting for the state to flip, and hopefully to their sides. Any challenge to that neutrality was going to blow it up. It was that on the edge. Now, Davis was hoping and praying, that Kentucky would eventually secede, and was afraid something was going to happen to screw it up. They ended up stepping in it themselves. So the rebels, they are amassing troops in the western end of Tennessee, just south of that Kentucky border near the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers, Also, the access points to the Mississippi River, as well as near Missouri and the other western border state, the other one, right? The Union, by the way, begins to gather men in Cairo, Illinois, just over the border west of Kentucky on the Ohio River. So what you have is the Union Army in Cairo, west of Kentucky, and the Rebs south along the Tennessee-Kentucky border, basically just staring at each other. That's what they do. They just stare at each other,
Guys
right?
Just stare at each other?
Just waiting for them, want somebody to make a mistake. Not sure if one of them was expecting a phone call that never came, but who the hell knows? But that's what happened. So
25 times.
So, God, tell me about it. So September of 1861, the shit finally hits the fan. Okay, when you put enough people in the bar and they're drinking and they're belligerent, it's going to be a fight eventually. Okay, in Missouri, near the western border of Kentucky, along the Mississippi River, finds itself the Confederate General Gideon Pillow, a guy who was as soft as his name. Okay. He takes his orders from Leonidas Polk, the fighting bishop from North Carolina and the head of that Western Department, number 2. What they're going to do.
So it was a shitty department?
It certainly was. It's going to cross the river into Kentucky and occupy the Kentucky town of Columbus.
Yeah.
A town, by the way, that some people think Thomas Jefferson wanted to be the U.S. capital. And that's a debate.
Interesting.
It's a long story. If you know anyone from Kentucky, they'll tell you that. Columbus was supposed to be the capital. But September 4th, 1861, Pillow has that hold my beer moment.
Yep.
Right? Where he is going to take the town. It's also the northern point of that Mobile and Ohio Railroad. So in response, of course, right off the bat, the rebels violated this neutrality.
Yeah.
So in response, Ulysses S. Grant is going to leave Cairo and will enter Kentucky and occupy Paducah, Kentucky. So he's going to say, well, he's there, I can go. The powder keg was lit. And Pillow's move likely caused a facepalm from Jefferson Davis that could be heard all the way in Mississippi. This was not what he wanted.
No.
So September 1861, Kentucky's legislature predictably condemns the Confederate move into the state for violating the neutrality agreement and votes to enter the war on the Union's behalf. Now, the Union's going to place Fort Sumter hero Robert Anderson in charge. They're not going to sit there and throw their whole weight behind it, but they're pissed off. Now, the Union troops are going to enter Covington, Kentucky, just on the other side of the Ohio River as well, near Cincinnati. Today, home of the great Maine Strauss, where the great cigar whiskey bars are, if the mood should strike you. Just saying, okay?
Also the home of William H. Lytle, who we did an episode on a few weeks ago.
Sure. We're going to hear about him soon. Not today. We'll talk about old Lytle next week. So if you're excited for Lytle, get your, wake the kids, call the neighbors. Next week's going to be the day. In Columbus, the Rebs have 20,000 troops who are building fortifications near the Mississippi River to defend the town from an attack they have to assume is coming as a matter of time.
Yeah, well, it's considered Columbus was considered the key at that point to controlling the Mississippi in that area, so that's why they felt the need to take control of it.
Yeah, but regardless, wherever they were going to be, they had to think they were going to get thrown out. Now, Polk chose poorly with this move, obviously, and he was completely tone deaf to the political football that was Kentucky's neutrality. But now he's entrenched in Columbus. He's got 20,000 men and 140 cannon. So he's strapped it on. He's ready to go, okay? He certainly does. Now, Davis sees this YOLO moment from Polk that he violated this neutrality agreement and has no real choice now but to go all in and try to take the state over.
Yep.
Since Kentucky flipping without conflict was gone, see, what he was hoping for was eventually Kentucky, because of the pro-slavery, they were eventually going to slide over on their own.
Yep.
And he was just sitting and waiting, but he was afraid that if the rebels did something stupid to piss them off, he was going to lose them. And Pillow and Polk pissed him off and he lost him. So he's going to send a guy named Felix Zollicoffer to guard the Cumberland Gap and Simon Bolivar Buckner to capture Bowling Green and that Louisville-Nashville Railroad. So Davis, like friggin', he absolute Leroy Jenkins moment. But now we have to go in. So everyone's going in, right? Albert Sidney Johnson, the commanding the rebel Western Department, has a huge pain in the ass situation, So his army now is in Columbus, Kentucky, and spread all the way to the Cumberland Gap, which is 400 miles away. And he's only got 48,000 troops to cover. I'll let you figure out how many men per mile that is, but it's not a lot of people. It's a thin line.
Don't make me do math.
No, that's a bad situation for anybody right there. So we talked about this in one of the earlier episodes about that thin line that Johnston had.
Yeah.
But the Union rebel troops on the same theater quickly began the battles that would percolate in Kentucky that would explode later in the year. So January 1862, Felix Zollicoffer, he's going to be killed and his army defeated at the Battle of Mill Springs by the George the Rock of Mill Springs.
Interesting.
Right?
A couple interesting things about that battle. So first of all, it's got about 1 billion different names.
Yep.
And the reason that it is called Battle of Mill Springs is because of General Thomas's report that he writes after and gets published in the newspapers. That's why it's known as that. Its other name is Battle of Fishing Creek, and there's other ones too, which we are definitely going to do an episode about this battle, so stay tuned for that, but not until January. It's the first significant Union victory in the Civil War, but again, it's in the Western theater, just doesn't get talked about that much, right? The two Confederate generals there, General George Crittenden, his brother is actually fighting for the Union, and as you said, General Felix Zollicoffer, who apparently wore a white jacket and blue pants into the battle. He got killed when he was talking to a Union officer. The Union officer's like, I don't know who you are, and they're trying to figure out who the other one is, and he ends up getting killed. Well, after the battle, Zollicoffer is killed, but Crittenden is accused of drunkenness after the battle, gets demoted, and eventually just gets kicked out of the army because he was constantly drunk, apparently. So this broke the Confederate line that was in eastern Kentucky, and it would not be until the summer that the Confederates are going to start to try and take it back. But Zollicoffer getting killed is why General Edmund Kirby Smith gets the command that he does.
Now, don't forget, too, while this is going on, a couple months later, U.S. Grant and his 10,000 men and his guys on the boats, they launched that joint Navy-Army campaign, which is going to culminate in the Forts Henry and Donelson captures near that Kentucky-Tennessee border. Mm-hmm. And this was really the weak point of Johnson's line. But so Grant is, he drives the rebels out of Fort Donelson. He takes that surrender from his friend Simon Bolivar Buckner on February 16th, 1862. It got him that unconditional surrender nickname. But what it did, too, is it earned a shit ton of respect from Lincoln for Grant. Yep. Now, we'll talk about how this goes, but what these two attacks really did, the captures in Mill Springs, is it pushed the Rebs out of Kentucky, right? Yeah. Like to your point. And also what it did, too, it also allowed them to slide into Nashville and take Nashville.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So now the nightmare of Davis has come to full friggin' tuition now, making a huge miscalculation of a general making a frigging blunder that costs his army the hope of controlling Kentucky. So for this moment, as we step into early spring 1862, Kentucky's a complete mess. So now they have to spend all this time to go ahead and try to get it. So Albert Sidney Johnson decides what he wants to do is he wants to bring the remains of his army together. So he blew his conch shell, and to gather all the troops in Corinth, Mississippi. Yep. Right. And his hope was obviously to regroup and rest his army to create an opportunity again to capture Kentucky. So the army he had was a complete mess. It was a hodgepodge of rebels. Corinth basically became the island of misfit toys for a while, and that's exactly what it was. He did have Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard with him. He did have Braxton Bragg with him. So he had a couple of generals who, we'll talk about them, right? For the Union, though, they just kicked the rebels out of Kentucky, but they weren't wrapped too tight either because they didn't have tight control of the Commonwealth there, despite kicking them up. Henry Halleck, Department of Missouri, this is when you're going to get the controversy with Don Carlos Buell with this stuff, right?
Yeah. There's all this controversy between the two of them, and I don't quite understand what was going on there. But what happened is it goes back to when Buell was almost kicked out of the army for getting in an argument with somebody and beating them over the head with the butt end of his rifle.
Well, it was a sword.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, a sword. He ends up just completely getting off, like nothing happens. And Halleck always believed he should have been punished for that. If you know Halleck, you know that once you're in Halleck's doghouse, you ain't getting out.
You know who else? What Winfield Scott wanted him punished for that.
Exactly. They both did.
So Don Carlos Buell was new. He was freshly minted. He was still shiny in the Army. And he does this, and he's got the top of the Army guys saying, who the hell is this guy? Get him the freak.
Yeah.
So he gets court-martialed, but he gets off somehow. I think there's a million reasons why we'll talk about why he doesn't like Don Carlos Buell. But Halleck doesn't like him.
Halleck doesn't like anybody except maybe his pet dog, if he has a pet dog.
Hallie.
Hallie, yes, Hallie. God, it's so bad.
No, it's just so. The thing about Buell, though, we'll talk about him in detail here in a little while.
Yeah.
He was ambivalent and he was wishy-washy. He was one of those, I'll do the dishes tomorrow. He was one of those guys, right?
Yeah.
And so Halleck wanted to do something. He's like that guy with the stick poking the guy saying,
do something.
That's
do
him,
something.
Right?
Yeah.
So Halleck decided, what he's going to do is he's kind of with Buell, kind of working kind of together, side by side.
Yep.
Okay. Kind of like Howard and Hancock at Gettysburg was supposed to work.
Yeah, that worked out real well.
Right. But Halleck decides Buell isn't doing anything. I'm just going to act alone. Screw it. So he sends Grant up to Tennessee towards Corinth.
Yep.
Now, Lincoln, who's also pissed at Buell because his lack of movement, he is going to put Buell's entire army of the Ohio under Halleck's command. So now Halleck gets to call the shots now. If you ever wonder why Buell hated Halleck, this is probably why.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Buell's also friends with G. McClellan.
Yeah, well, that's exactly. Now, Halleck orders Buell to meet up with Grant to advance to Corinth, where Johnson's growing and training army was sitting. Yeah. Now, Buell naturally was slow to move. Grant probably sat waiting for him at Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee, which is where he went. What's that?
He was doing some whittling.
He was doing some whittling, waiting that phone to ring. It never happened. Must have been a Friday, and so Johnston, realizing Grant was waiting, Albert City Johnson, rather, in such a vulnerable spot, decides to take the initiative and attack him on April 6, 1862, which is going to result in the Battle of Shiloh, right? So Buell does arrive a day late, $1 short on April 7th, and he does help Grant drive back the Rebs all the way back to Corinth. Beauregard's now in charge because Albert City Johnson goes up the spout, he gets shot in the leg and bleeds out, and that's the end of that. If you want the full details of Shiloh, please refer to our episode.
Yes.
But we're just kind of hitting this real quick. So at the end of the day, Beauregard's going to retreat back to Corinth and eventually all the way back to Tupelo, Mississippi. And for that, he's going to get fired by Jefferson Davis and replace him with Braxton Bragg, which is kind of bullshit because there was a million reasons why that Corinth was unsustainable.
It was to do with the fact that there was at that point there, and this will carry into reasons that Perryville has fought, which we'll talk about more in our next episode. We might get into a little bit at the end of this episode, but Beauregard has to leave Corinth because of supplies. Like it was a drought.
It was the water.
Yeah, it was a drought. And I don't think people realize like how much water an army needs. And it's not just for the men, it's for the horses. But if you're going to fight battles, you need a certain amount of water every time you fire a cannon, right?
You need to gallons of water per cannon. The issue was you had no drinkable water.
Exactly.
The only drinkable water, the soldiers ruined by using it as a latrine.
Yeah.
So you didn't have any, right? So Beauregard is going to have to withdraw from Corinth in the face of the enemy, puts out the Quaker logs and sneaks out of Dodge and goes back to Tupelo. Of course, Jefferson Davis loses his mind and brings Bragg in.
Yeah. I honestly think that Davis was looking for a reason to get rid of Beauregard because he didn't like Beauregard that much. I think Davis was the type of person that kept his friend, like he liked his friends being in charge. Like he's friends with Polk, and Polk makes this huge error in going into Kentucky and breaking that neutrality, right? Meanwhile, the only reason Polk ends up leaving command is because he meets a cannonball and it doesn't work out too well for him. Thank you to Oliver Otis Howard for that one. There's our second OO reference. Braxton Bragg is also friends with Jefferson Davis as well. So there's Bragg and his army sitting at Tupelo, Mississippi, and he's thinking, okay, I've got to get back into Kentucky somehow, and we've got to make something happen because at this point, the Union is just starting to threaten Vicksburg, but the other place they're threatening is Chattanooga. Those are two places that the Confederacy absolutely has to hold on to.
Buell's got 110,000 guys, the Army of the Ohio. He's in Corinth. Halleck, not trusting Buell in any way, shape, or form, is going to go to Corinth, take command. But Bragg's got about 30,000 guys, and that numbers is slowly growing in that Army of the Mississippi. They're just 50 miles away. So sitting 50 miles away in Tupelo, his army is still a mess. A lot of these guys in Bragg's army, they're conscripted. They don't want to freaking be there. This is where he benefits by having Halleck. Halleck took a whole month to travel from Shiloh to Corinth, which is 30 miles away.
Yep.
Which you can roller skate backwards with your headband on faster.
Listening to Call Me Maybe.
With your whistle.
Yep.
Okay. With the four wheels, not the blades. Okay. Now you could do that. Now Bragg used that time to discipline his troops. Now, what people don't study Bragg don't realize what a bastard he was as far as training goes.
Oh my God.
He would execute soldiers for the seemingly innocent mistakes of their guns discharging by accident, which they make a pill for, by the way, in case you're curious. But his goal was to take that mob and turn it into a fighting army. And he's going to use the opportunity that he knows Halleck is not going to hit him. So he's going to sit there and he's going to work them, which he does brutally. And by June of 1862, you kind of hinted at this a little bit ago, General Kirby Smith is replacing Zollicoffer of the Department of East Tennessee after he got whacked at Mill Springs in January. Okay. Yep. And he's been pushed out of the Cumberland back gap towards Chattanooga. So here's where you said a second ago, that dance for Chattanooga happens. Yep. Halleck begins to send troops of the army in Corinth towards Chattanooga. Right. Now, Bragg, he's sitting there, he realizes, shit, Halleck is actually doing something. Mm-hmm. I better do something too. He has no choice, even though he's got not as many guys, he has to send troops to aid Smith to Chattanooga. And this is really, as these troops on both sides are starting to move, this is kind of that, once they start moving, they don't stop until it gets to Perryville. No. They just keep moving around and around and around.
Yeah, this is the movement that begins this is probably the first phase into what will become this invasion into Kentucky and become the Kentucky campaign. But Bragg is going to transfer his army of 30,000 infantry over 800 miles using half a dozen different railways from Tupelo through Meridian, Mobile, Montgomery, and Atlanta before finally getting to Chattanooga on July the 29th. This is at the time, one of the biggest transfers of an army that has happened. It is done via the railway system as well. Mm-hmm. But you can just, and you think back to when Chattanooga was captured, like looking back to this, like when it's finally taken by the Union, you realize the importance. Like if he's like, oh, fuck, I got to get all my troops there right now. Chattanooga and Vicksburg are the two most important cities. He's taking them all to Chattanooga.
Kirby Smith was aggressive. As he sees the Union starting to move and he sees the command and control structure in Kentucky all spread around, he's starting to realize that there's an opportunity that they can do something here, especially in Middle Tennessee, which appears now to be ripe for an attack. So, he probably shoots, Bragg a text because Facebook Messenger was probably down. So
that is the
worst.
Hey,
listen, he says, oh God. He says, Middle Tennessee is exposed. We could do something with this. So Bragg, of course, I don't know. Finally comes around. Mm-hmm. He's like, you know what? All right. I'm going to move my base of operations, to your point, to Chattanooga, okay? This is where, an important note to point out about this, and we've talked about it off and on, is the weather here. Mm-hmm. Now, the region of that country was experienced tremendous heat, lack of rain, and it was creating a significant drought, okay? Water was a premium. When we get to the Battle of Perryville, this water is what's going to be the cause of the entire battle. Yep. It's what the flashpoint's going to be. Buell and Bragg are both moving towards Chattanooga. Bragg especially, his army's in great spirits. They've been training, they're moving, they've been resting, they've been sitting around. They feel like they can beat anybody, okay? Bragg was convinced now that he has the men and he has the wherewithal to maybe finally cross that northern border over to Tennessee and get into Kentucky now. Mm-hmm. So Buell, on the other hand, he's also moving through Chattanooga, okay? And he's stuck in that heat, and he's having his ass slapped around by Nathan Bedford Forrest and John Hunt Morgan's cavalry. He's having a tough time getting there.
And Lincoln's getting annoyed with him because Lincoln's like, can you fucking take Chattanooga, can you? And Buell's like, I can't. I need more reinforcements, blah, blah, blah. And he's just, and this is a pattern when we talk a little bit more about Buell in detail here in a few minutes. This is something with Buell. He's slow to the point where even McClellan complains about it. He doesn't move. He doesn't get things done, I guess you could say, about him.
June 11th, 1862, This is when they really begin to spring the eventual plan. We kind of talked about a little bit on the Richmond thing.
Yeah.
This is when they sick John Hunt Morgan and his cavalry of 2,500 handpicked dudes into Kentucky from Sparta, Tennessee to do cavalry shit. They're going to move through middle Kentucky, right up the Ohio River, right up to Cincinnati. Actually, got to cross it, but Bragg says don't go into freaking there. He does anyway. It's a big thing. He gets out there, has no problem, and he wreaks absolute havoc on the Union. He captures 6,000 Union troops.
Yep.
He destroys 34 bridges. He did a bunch of railroad. He terrorizes the state. And what he did is he paved the road for Bragg, who knew the state was completely had its pants down at this point.
And it was to the point where the governor of Kentucky, the Union military governor, and even President Lincoln, they're receiving all these frantic appeals for help. Like they are having a stampede in Kentucky in a way, it's also been said too that Morgan's raid surpassed what Jeb Stuart's ride around McClellan did. Like Morgan caused millions of dollars in damage and millions of dollars of lost supplies by what he did there. It's one of the reasons I think that gave Bragg and Smith the confidence they needed that they could do this, that they could launch this campaign into Kentucky to take it. But, Morgan, he's absolutely relentless with this.
He does. He gets his brother killed in this, though, so it isn't all sunshine for him. But you're absolutely right. In August of 1862, Jefferson Davis writes to Bragg after he gets the report of Morgan's raid here and says, it's time to go into Kentucky. There's no one there, So Kirby Smith is going to be the guy. He's going to take his 19,000 merry men, and he'll be the lead element into Kentucky, and will drive into Kentucky through that Cumberland Gap with his 4 divisions. So this endless heat is still the issue. The lack of water plus train is going to slow their roll as they're going, but they're going to keep going. By the time you get to late August now, they're going to march towards Lexington, Kentucky, and they're going to run into an experienced Green federal troops under General Marlon Manson and William Bull Nelson just south of the city of Richmond. Now, we talked about this, but I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But needless to say, August 30th, 1862, at the Battle of Richmond, where, of course, Patrick Cleburne, got to mention him, he's going to attack those Green Union troops at the Mount Zion Church as the lead division under Kirby Smith. This battle will become one of the, if not the most lopsided Confederate victories in the entire war. The Union troops get routed. They take 5,000 casualties, and they get pushed back all the way to Cincinnati. That's how bad they got their butt slaps.
Yeah, this defeat was not what the Union needed at this time. The Battle of Richmond is being fought at the same time as Second Manassas. And this is something to consider when you're looking at this campaign in Kentucky, is what's going on in the East and how that just overshadows what's happening here in the West, which I think is equally as important, because this is something that Lincoln is shouldering. Lincoln is not just shouldering that emancipation, which is very important. That's probably the most important thing he's got going on right now. And that's why Antietam kind of comes out as the shining battle in all of this in late summer, early fall of 1862. But there's also this stuff happening in Kentucky, which when you look at how Lincoln felt about Kentucky, was saying that he had to have it with it's what's holding everything together. If it falls, then we're going to lose everything else. We're going to be fucked. This, I think, Kentucky is so understudied, and this is such an important part of the Civil War that I think if you study what's happening in the Eastern Theater at this time, you need to study what's happening in the Western Theater in Kentucky too, to have a full understanding of, what exactly is happening. Because guess what? If Kentucky falls to the Confederacy, I don't think it's really going to matter what happens in the Eastern Theater.
What's interesting about Kentucky is you have different cities so you have Lexington, which is extremely pro-Confederate, and you have Louisville, which is pro-Union. So September 2nd, of 1862, this is just after now the Battle of Richmond, the Rebs are going to keep moving. They're going to get to Lexington, Kentucky, and they're going to enter the town as conquering heroes and liberators. They're going to walk in. They're going to get the key to the city. They're going to be so they're going to walk in there with their chest pumped high.
Yep.
Morale is completely sky after the Richmond victory, and their treatment in Lexington. I mean, they're people who they're marching through, and they're finally being welcomed as heroes. Now, Bragg, his army is up to 40,000 people now. And he is marching through Kentucky. You can imagine him with his, strutting like a chicken, probably. Who the hell knows? But Kirby
Smith. I just imagine him as some kind of proud rooster,
Probably. Kirby Smith, now having taken Lexington, and he's already sitting scheming his next move now.
Yeah, he is.
Smith decides he's on to Cincinnati, as a popular football coach likes to
Yeah,
say.
and guess who he sends to Cincinnati?
He sends Henry, as you say, Heth. And he sends Henry Heath's division across the Ohio River into that Queen City, and he also sends John Scott and his cavalry guys to Louisville. Right.
Yep.
So he's splitting. But September 3rd, the next day, the rebels are going to actually occupy Frankfort, which is the capital of Kentucky, in case you don't know, which is just north of Lexington. So it's right on the corner. The Commonwealth of Kentucky now is in full shit panic.
Don't you mean the great state? Don't you mean the great state of Kentucky?
So they're in a full panic mode, and it's actually going to result in 70,000 troops signing up for the Union nationally.
Yeah,
that's how it's going to be.
The other thing that happens too is Lincoln gets a telegram from the very concerned citizens in Louisville that says the panic still prevails. Lexington and Frankfort are in the hands of the rebels. Unless the state is reinforced with veteran troops, Kentucky will be overrun. So this is another thing to consider when you're looking at Kentucky is, so not only is he dealing with the fallout of Second Manassas, he's dealing with this too.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I mentioned this on our Facebook Live. There's been a couple Lincoln biographies I've read where they talk a lot about what he's dealing with Second Manassas and the emancipation. Kentucky never really gets mentioned too much. It's almost like a footnote, but I think it's on his mind as much as what's happening in the Eastern Theater too. And I think that's why it's so important to study it.
Well, I think it has to be. I mean, he's lucky, but Kentucky's, that town, that Covington we mentioned, they get placed under martial law. But the thing about it though is that Kirby Smith raid with those guys was just kind of a temporary thing because they spread themselves a little too thin, so that they end up falling back to Lexington. But the beat rolls on. September 13th, 1862, Bragg's primary force is still marching, and they're going to arrive in a place called Glasgow, Kentucky, which is just east of Bowling Green. The next couple of days later, on the 17th of 1862, which I think there was another battle in the east around there, I think, it's on that date, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think, this is a fun story, the James Chalmers story, right? So James Chalmers.
Oh, yes, I was reading about that, the whole thing with Wilder and...
So they get all excited. They get their dander up. They decide they're gonna go attack a bridge in a place called Munfordville, Kentucky, and they get their ass kicked unexpectedly. Yeah. Bragg gets pissed off, right? And they eventually they surround the whole town. The Union guys end up surrendering.
Well, it's actually a really cool story of what happens here. Well, I shouldn't say cool. It's an interesting story because it involves Colonel John T. Wilder, who we see later on at Chickamauga. And what happens with it is, so Munfordville is occupied by the Union, and Wilder's commanding the garrison here, which is 3 regiments behind fortifications. So what happens is Chalmers approaches, since Kirby Smith had told him that there were not more than 1,800 men, entirely raw troops, and that they were fortifying their position, but that the railroad and telegraph had been destroyed in their rear, cutting them off completely from all communication and reinforcements. So Chalmers goes out to Wilder and says, hey, do you want to surrender? And Wilder basically says, fuck you. No, get out of here. So then Chalmers launches some frontal assaults, which are repulsed. So Bragg is pissed at Chalmers for even attacking in an unauthorized and injudicious assault. I'm sure he said it in much more colorful language than that. But still, though, he's kind of like, I do want these bastards to surrender. So could you make that work? So what Bragg does, he forces his army to march around 25 miles the night of September 15th, 16th to Munfordville. And then he realized that Buell's forces are near, decides to see if there's one last chance at surrendering. So Wilder again goes under a flag of truce behind enemy lines. And this time it's Simon Bolivar Buckner that shows him the Confederate strength to show that it's not really a great idea for him to be carrying on. And Wilder takes one look at it and he's like, yeah, you know what? We're done here. We'll surrender. Yeah. So the Federals are all paroled the next day and they have to leave Munfordville. But it's said that when they left, one Confederate soldier said that the Union troops were all very well clothed, looked fat and sleek and clean and neat, and were in strange contrast to our own hungry, ragged, and dirty-looking rebels. So they're leaving because they've been in Munfordville seemingly having the time of their life. They've had well supplied. They've been fed. Clearly, they've had water as well. But the one thing with Munfordville is that it was clearly just a distraction for the Confederates. And all it did, ultimately, when you look at this campaign in the grand scheme of things, is it slowed them down. They really didn't gain anything by taking Munfordville. all they got was lost time. And it shows also the miscommunication that's going on between Bragg and Smith. Like, it's almost like it's they're very disjointed. Like, Smith is basically somewhat independent from Bragg. The big vision with this campaign is we're going to get Kentucky. We're going to be able to get troops when they're there. Well, they haven't recruited that many troops by this point. But it shows that there's not a lot of vision on Bragg's part with this campaign. It was good at first, and it was, probably going pretty well till Richmond, but now it's starting, the wheels are really starting to fall off here as we're starting to lead into what will be the Battle of Perryville.
Exactly. So Bragg, they keep moving, and they keep going north to get to a place called Bardstown, Kentucky, which is near Louisville, right? And what he wants to do there is he wants to meet up with Kirby Smith now. He wants to get the band together again. Because now that's like, okay, now we got to get a little serious here. But they're in so good spirits. Buell is having a shitty time with that army in the South, and they're still stuck with that lack of water. He moves his army, to Nashville from where he was in Huntsville, Alabama. And then when he finally realizes that Bragg was kind of moving, he's going to head north, and he's going to leave George Thomas in Nashville.
Yep.
Oh, go have fun. I'll just
No.
Right. So that's what's going to happen. So real quick, Don Carlos Buell, he's born in Lowell, Ohio. So there we go. Okay. In 1818.
Mm-hmm.
And by many accounts, Mary, he was a shy, introverted child.
He was, and he was bullied as a kid.
He was teased by schoolmates, probably had a bad third grade picture with a bad haircut, was attacked by a pelican too. He probably had a really tough childhood. Right?
That was sixth grade, and it was a peacock.
All right. Well, there we go. Explain the bad haircut, though. But anyway, so he graduates from West Point in 1841, 32 out of 52, and primarily because he was a deviant. I mean, he got in trouble, discipline issues, got a bunch of demerits.
But he had good math skills.
He had very good math skills. He certainly did. He's going to join the 3rd U.S. Infantry after he graduates. This is when he beats up the guy with the sword, the butt of the sword. He gets in trouble.
The bully becomes the bully.
He does. That's probably what it was, too many people. But he ends up fighting in Mexico. He's brevetted 3 times of bravery. When the Civil War starts, he gets sent over to California, but he gets recalled to Virginia after First Bull Run and got his star thanks to his good friend George McClellan.
Yep.
I can only imagine a conversation with them two. It must take 5 hours to say hello.
But McClellan's going to get pissed off with Buell later for being slow.
Exactly.
Holy fuck.
When Mac replaces Winfield Scott, he's going to send Buell out west and divide his command between himself and Henry Halleck. And in November of 1861, he's going to take over that arm of the Ohio from
William Tecumseh Sherman. Because that's when Uncle Blingy has his little incident with the media, and he's said to be insane. So they basically have to give Uncle Blingy a bit of a time out.
And so Sherman gets put in the corner, and here comes Don Carlos Buell. So it doesn't take long until the slows catch up with Don Carlos Buell, who was nicknamed the McClellan of the West, they called him.
Yeah.
For his they called it a deliberate approach of how he was, and his attitude towards the South. His wife was a slave owner, and he had a lot of pro Southern sympathies.
So that's actually that's a lot like McClellan as well. Not that his wife was a slave owner, but McClellan had a lot of friends who were Southern, and he had a little. I think he's a little bit more Southern leaning at times.
Well, they were very, very similar in that regard, especially their attitudes towards the South. They wanted to win the war, but win it slowly and softly, like a man with a slow hand. You don't want to beat them. You don't want to hit them too hard because you're going to be friends with these guys afterwards, right? So they had a very similar approach. September 25th. 1862, Mary, Buell's Army of the Ohio was going to arrive in Louisville, a predominant Union supporting town.
And they're just leaving there now because that's how slow they are.
Exactly. Definitely, hit a Cardinals game. But they're greeted as heroes as well, just like they were in Lexington with the Confederates. So now they're feeling good about themselves. One reason why they're so happy in Louisville, besides being a predominant Union town, is they thought that Bragg was going to be coming to them soon. And now they got the Union Army there to protect them. So Union morale is extremely high. Word of the victory in Antietam gets there, and they're all excited. The Army got to hang out in Louisville for 4 whole days, and they ate like kings and drank like pirates. And suddenly they're feeling great about their prospects. Now they're feeling, hey, you know what? This isn't too friggin' bad.
There must have been a DQ there.
Well, I imagine there probably would be, but So a couple of days later, it's October 1st, 1862, and Buell's 75,000-man army now is on the march. They left for Bardstown, Kentucky, which is not far from where Bragg was.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of getting close here to call me maybe time with this battle, right? So Bardstown is southeast of Louisville. It's not far from where Fort Knox is today, in case you ever need some gold. You know where to go, okay?
Yep.
Buell felt that his army was prepared and in great spirits to fight and attack Bragg and throw the Rebs out of Kentucky for freaking good. So now they're ready to go. So he's going to take his army to the Ohio, which is going to be divided into 3 corps. First corps, Alexander McCook of Ohioans.
Yep.
Second corps is Thomas Crittenden, you mentioned, Kentucky, right? And the third one is Charles Champion Gilbert from Zanesville, Ohio, where our friend Roger sent a picture of it.
Yep.
Sent a picture of his grave, but your middle name is Champion. You're doing something. It was great at this time because when they're marching towards Bragg, he's away in Frankfort at a political rally. And during one of the speeches, he hears the distant sounds of artillery fire. And he has a full pucker effect moment, Braxton Bragg does.
Yep.
Bragg is Buell's army, so he quickly had all the bridges in Frankfort burned, as well as their warehouses. So welcome to Frankfort. You burn a whole freaking town up for nothing. It was actually Joshua Still's division, we mentioned last week, I think it was, right? But it scared the living hell out of Braxton Bragg, especially since he wasn't with the army. Because that would have been bad idea, Genes, if Jefferson Davis found out they got smoked in Kentucky. He wasn't even there, right?
Yep.
So Bragg now, he's going to order all the rebel troops, all of them, to converge and concentrate on Harrodsburg, Kentucky, which is just east of Bardstown, to prepare for the inevitable arrival of Buell's army. Okay, so now you can see the distant rumblings now. October 6th, 1862, rebel armies finally start to arrive in Harrodsburg, and their morale is still sky high. The armies have arrived, some get there before others. The one that arrived, they're resting. They all got DQ gift certificates.
Yep.
Some divisions were still in transit, though, and they were still coming. And so while they were moving, the other ones were there, they were just kind of chilling. Buell's army is approaching, but Bragg thought, this is where Bragg screws up. He thinks the army of the Ohio was advancing on Frankfort and not Harrisburg. So he thinks they're 40 miles away, and he still has time for all his divisions to unite, those ones who haven't arrived yet. He's expected to hit them with everything they have in a place called Versailles, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Bragg wants to fight. He's going to have everyone together. They're going to be going towards Frankfort, and then I'm going to be able to hit in Versailles, which is just east of Lexington and north of Harrodsburg. So he's going to set up some kind of Gibraltar and just kind of start pounding them. That's what Bragg thinks. Little does he know that Buell is coming up through his Savannah from the back.
Ooh.
Okay? He's coming up from the south and behind his army. So Bragg is starting to hear rumors now from scouts saying, hey, not for nothing. I know you're looking this way, but we're hearing stories of a large federal force coming from that away.
Yep.
From this direction. Buell has his 3 corps in 3 different roads and advancing towards a small town called Perryville, Kentucky.
Yeah.
That's where they're heading. McCook's 1st Corps is coming from the northwest, Crittenden's coming from the southwest, and Gilbert's Champion from the west, right? This all while Bragg is still moving north towards Versailles with no real knowledge, just rumors that Buell was right on his tail with his full friggin' army. Oh, by the way, there's still a drought going.
Yep, exactly. And so there's this drought happening, but there's somebody that's going to get to Perryville, and that somebody is William J. Hardee. Is going to arrive at Perryville. And Perryville, and I'm sure we'll talk briefly about it in the next episode too, but Perryville is just a very small village. It's only got 300 people. But the thing with it is this, and this is what Hardee recognizes about it as soon as he gets there. Holy shit. It's got a good road network with connections to nearby towns in 6 directions, much like a little town in the Eastern Theater that we are all very familiar with, Gettysburg. And also, Hardee recognizes that if he can stay in this town, block the roads, that the Federals would be prevented from getting to Confederate supply depot at Bryantsville. Also, Perryville is a source of water. Now, although it is just almost like mud puddles at this point, which is kind of gross, but hey, when you're in a drought, it's kind of like any port in a storm, right?
Well, that's why I don't drink tequila, Mary.
That's what Perryville is. And then Buell learns that Hardee has halted at Perryville, and they are starting to deploy their infantry there.
Yeah, he sets up his picket lines on the three roads that are coming in,
Yep.
the same roads that he was expecting, and he puts troops in a defensive position at a place called Peters Hill, which is one of the several undulations in that area, right?
Rolling hills.
So exactly. So this is October 7th now,
Yep.
so we're getting close now to the battle. So Don Carlos Buell that same day, he's going to sustain an injury that day when he's going to fall off his horse and he's going to be hobbled. He will end up setting up his headquarters at a place called the Dorsey House, which is a little log cabin about 5 miles from Perryville. His plan, he's like, well, this is where it kind of goes off the rail a little bit. He wants to attack the next morning on October 8th. So he'll have his first two corps get ready around 3 o'clock in the morning to move, along with that third corps. He's going to send them all, but 3 a.m. is the time. Now, McCook and his first corps don't get the orders until almost 3 a.m. So he's like, all right, well, okay. He must have my mailman. That's how late that day was, right?
So, no, he's got the Canadian mailman. Trust me. I'm still waiting for that John Wilkes Booth book.
Oh, God. And he won't be, and so he's not going to be ready to move until 5 o'clock in the morning. So he's already late. George Thomas, his troops there, Buell's second in command, he doesn't even get the orders right away. So he doesn't even know until about 3 o'clock when that's going on. What's interesting is sometimes these battles, Mary, happen on their own schedules, right? That's kind of what happens, right?
Yep.
So Gilbert's third corps is camping along the Springfield Pike, and they discover a water source. And we mentioned before how important water was, right? They're going to discover this water source at a place called Doctors Creek late on the 7th. And due to that drought, drinking water was as rare as gold. I mean, the sight of the springs must have been like you getting locked in the Labatt's Blue Brewery overnight.
Ew.
I can only imagine how excited it must have been. But they find water. So Gilbert's going to order the 10th Indiana under a guy named Colonel William Colbaugh Keyes. But just think of William Colbaugh Keyes is going to send Speed Fry's 2nd Brigade. I dare anyone to challenge two better names back to back in the Civil War, right?
It sounded like Cobra Kai.
Yeah. So he wants him to set up a picket line on Peters Hill, almost right in front of that 7th Arkansas, who was there earlier. Now it's late at night. Keyes Indianans don't see the Arkansas soldiers because it's dark. They're right in front of them until about 2 o'clock in the morning. I go, okay, well, these guys look like they, might not be our guys. So Colonel Dan McCook's brigade under Phil Sheridan's division, Sheridan's here, Mary, he's part of Gilbert's corps, was also ordered to occupy that hill to protect the creek and the water that they had found. By now, Bragg's figured it out. Bragg knows the Union was in his rear because the scouts told him they spotted troops while they were scouting.
That sounds really bad.
I know. It was Bragg, though.
He's going to get savannah'd.
He had bigger problems back there anyway. But his scouts told him that they did spot these troops while they were scouting water themselves. So he knows they're there. And now he's going to have all his divisions start moving to Perryville. So now Perryville, it's not going to be Versailles, it's going to be Perryville. So they're all moving in.
Yep.
A guy named James Patton Anderson, Mary, he's in William Hardy's wing. He's going to arrive along with Patrick Claiborne and Benjamin Cheatham's brigades of guys named Daniel Donaldson, Alex Stewart, and George Maney. We're going to talk about these guys a lot next time.
Yeah.
Okay. But for now, they're there. Okay. All the tools and all these people are there. Because of water, they all got attracted to this place and they found each other. Now they found each other like, well, now what do you want to freaking do? So it's no surprise that in the middle of a drought, that one of the most bloody and pivotal battles of the Western theater of the American Civil War is going to get fought over water. Because that's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
The Rebs sat in Perryville on the night of October 7th, knowing the next day would bring on the battle. But I can't imagine either side ever imagined the overall impact to the overall war this battle that we're going to talk about next week is going to have.
Yeah, exactly. And just to quickly set up Hardy's lines that he's got going. So the night of October 7th, he's got his men set up. So he's got General Sterling A.M. Wood north of town. General Bushrod Johnson is to the right of Wood, which figure out that one. General St. John R. Liddell's Arkansas Brigade is on the crest of the bottom hill, and the 7th Arkansas is sent to Peters Hill. I really wanted to set it up, not just for people listening, but just also because you have Wood and Johnson right next to each other.
Oh, you can also say that Hardy got poked by Johnson. Anyway,
Sterling A.M. Wood. How many instances are you going to have Sterling A.M. Wood?
And that's why these episodes won't get played at the elementary school history classes.
Next to Bushrod Johnson.
All right. So I think what this is going to do is why we did this to set the stage with this is because these armies have been going around and around the block in Kentucky for the whole summer, completely dry, thirsty, hot, and miserable, right? Bumping into each other at places like Mill Springs, Richmond, all these little places finally getting together and be able to finally fight this pivotal battle that's going to determine Kentucky, a gigantic border state, which could have a trickle-down effect on the other border states in the overall war. They're going to hit basically on the march by mistake because of looking for water.
Yep.
And when we talk about this, the actual battle next week, the actual carnage that takes place at this, the Union's going to win this battle, and it's going to set up Kentucky being kicked out of Confederate control for really the rest of the war. But I think it has so many overall effects about some of the guys who were involved in this battle. But I think it's going to prove itself to be pretty vicious, and one that I think is going to be an interesting one to talk about, no question.
Yeah, and that's why we decided to do this into 2 episodes, because we wanted to do this justice, and plus we'd already covered Richmond, and we thought, well, let's just talk more in depth about what's going on in Kentucky, because we both realized in doing the research for this, like, holy shit, Kentucky is one of those things that if it falls into Confederate hands, who knows if something like Antietam really is going to matter as much as what it does now. But the other thing too is just to highlight that what is happening in the Western theater is just as important as what's happening in the Eastern theater. You take something like Perryville and you take something like Antietam. I think it's like that meme where there's that one guy who's got all the microphones with him, and that's Antietam, and then there's the one guy that's got one microphone, and that's Perryville. And we both get it. Like, Antietam's very important because it allowed Abraham Lincoln that victory to be able to say, like, hey, Emancipation Proclamation is going to happen now. It's kind of hard to say, like, would he have been able to do that, or would have been as well accepted or whatever, if Perryville had been a disaster.
No, definitely. So I always ask you what's next, but now we know what's next week. Mary, what's next?
Next week, we are going to be talking Battle of Perryville, and then we are going to be talking Cedar Creek. And then we will be on to our Halloween episode, which we will be joined by our very good friend and also awesome Civil War nerd, Jen Price, also known as Jay Price. She'll be coming on to talk Civil War ghost stories with us for our 2nd annual Halloween extravaganza. I want to say it's live from the Boo Barn, but that might be kind of creepy.
No, definitely. It's going to be another exciting, action-packed episode as we do that. So live coming on Saturday, and then we got the final episode on Perryville, which I think is going to be a great battle. So I think we can drop it here. I think this is a pretty good episode. Even though it took us forever to get signed on today, because somebody spilled coffee on the keyboard up there at Civil War Breakfast Club World Headquarters again. But that's the scoop. So any final words from you as we head off into the bright blue yonder behind you in your screen?
Thank you thank you to all of our listeners for these last 59 episodes. You guys are awesome, and thank you for all your support. Darren, thanks to you for bringing it, as you always do. You are the most awesome Civil War nerd I know.
Well, I'm just happy part of the team, Mary. You know how it is. Getting yelled at and slapped around, all that good stuff. I'm kidding, maybe.
Bucker.
Anyway, so that's off we go. So everybody, thanks for listening to this. Because I think it's great to set up Kentucky. I think when you listen to this and you go to bed at night, remember how important Kentucky was to this entire Civil War. Because it's something that, for whatever reason, Mary, it just doesn't get studied. The yin and the yang of Kentucky that went back and forth with these two armies and how it culminated, considering the stakes that how 2 good armies in the field, both presidents had to have it.
Yep.
And just how it all ultimately played itself out is really, really a great study. So that being said, off we go.
On to Perryville Part 2 next week. Anyway, so everybody have an awesome Saturday. We hope you join us for our Facebook Live at 10 a.m. And we will see you all next week.
All right. Peace out.
See you guys.